What happens when Hollywood's most outspoken activist meets a late-night host with a vendetta? You won't believe what unfolds when Sean Penn sits down for what was supposed to be a routine promotional interview, only to find himself in the crosshairs of one of television's most calculated ambushes. This isn't your typical celebrity chat gone wrong. This is a masterclass in how a host can destroy his own credibility in under 30 minutes. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because you're not going to believe what unfolds when two of Hollywood's biggest egos collide in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. Last night's episode of Jimmy Kimmel Live started like any other. The familiar opening monologue, the predictable political jabs, the studio audience laughing on cue. But what happened next would send shockwaves through the entertainment industry and leave viewers questioning everything they thought they knew about late-night television. Sean Penn, Academy Award winner and notorious for his passionate political activism, walked onto that stage expecting a friendly conversation about his latest humanitarian work. Instead, he found himself face-to-face with a host who seemed determined to make headlines at any cost. The trouble began even before the cameras started rolling. Sources backstage reported that Kimmel had been pacing nervously in his dressing room, muttering about ratings and relevance. His producers had apparently briefed him on Penn's recent controversial statements about American foreign policy, and something about the actor's unwavering principles seemed to trigger something dark in the host's psyche. This wasn't going to be about Penn's new film or his charitable foundation. This was going to be about control, about who could dominate the conversation, about a desperate host trying to reclaim his fading spotlight. As Penn settled into the guest chair, adjusting his jacket and offering his characteristic intense stare to the audience, Kimmel's demeanor was already shifting. Gone was the folksy, self-deprecating charm that had made him a household name. In its place was something sharper, more predatory. The audience, sensing the shift in energy, fell into an uncomfortable silence that would only grow thicker as the interview progressed. Sean Penn, everybody, Kimmel announced with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Thanks for being here, Sean. I have to ask, and our audience is dying to know, what's it like being Hollywood's most self-righteous activist? The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Penn's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his years of dealing with hostile journalists had taught him to maintain his composure. I think you might want to rephrase that question, Jimmy. Unless you're more interested in creating controversy than having an actual conversation. Kimmel leaned back in his chair, that predatory smile widening. Oh, I'm sorry, was that too direct? I thought you appreciated people who speak their minds. Isn't that your whole thing? Speaking truth to power, fighting the system, telling everyone else how they should think. The studio audience shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the playful banter they'd come to expect from late-night television. This felt personal, calculated, and increasingly hostile. Penn's publicist, watching from the wings, was already reaching for her phone, recognizing the signs of an interview spiraling out of control. My thing, as you put it, is using whatever platform I have to draw attention to issues that matter. Penn replied, his voice remaining steady despite the obvious provocation. Whether that's helping victims of natural disasters, supporting press freedom, or questioning foreign policy decisions that affect innocent people around the world. I'm curious, Jimmy, what's your thing? Making jokes about people who actually try to make a difference. The first real crack in Kimmel's facade appeared as his smile faltered for just a moment. But rather than backing down, he doubled down on his attack. That's interesting, Sean, because I've been looking at some of your recent statements, and I have to wonder, do you ever consider that maybe, just maybe, you don't have all the answers? That maybe your privileged Hollywood perspective doesn't automatically make you an expert on geopolitics? Penn's hands gripped the arms of his chair slightly tighter. Privileged perspective? Jimmy, I've spent months in war zones, disaster areas, and refugee camps. I've interviewed world leaders, worked with humanitarian organizations, and witnessed firsthand the consequences of the policies I critique. What exactly qualifies you to dismiss that experience? What qualifies me? Kimmel's voice was rising. Now, his professional composure cracking. I'm just a guy who doesn't pretend to be something he's not. I don't jet off to foreign countries for photo ops and then come back lecturing Americans about how they should feel about their government. The audience was dead silent now, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented. This wasn't scripted, banter, or playful celebrity roasting. This was a genuine confrontation between two men who clearly despised each other. Penn's publicist was frantically trying to get the attention of the show's producers, but they seemed frozen, unsure whether to intervene or let the train wreck continue for the sake of ratings. Photo ops. Penn's voice carried a dangerous edge. Now, Jimmy, when I was in Haiti after the earthquake, sleeping in tents and coordinating relief efforts for months, was that a photo op? When I was in New Orleans after Katrina, helping with rescue operations, was that for publicity? You sit behind this desk every night making jokes about serious issues, but when someone actually tries to do something about them, you dismiss it as grandstanding. Kimmel's mask was slipping completely now, revealing something ugly underneath. You know what, Sean? You're right. I do sit behind this desk every night. And you know what I've learned? People don't want to be lectured by actors who think their success in Hollywood somehow makes them moral authorities. They want to be entertained, not preached to by someone who's never had to worry about making rent or putting food on the table. Never had to worry? Penn's voice was incredulous. Jimmy, you make more money in a month than most people see in a lifetime. You're sitting in a multi-million-dollar studio, surrounded by writers and producers, and an army of people whose job it is to make you look good. And you want to talk about privilege? The tension in the studio was palpable now. Crew members were exchanging worried glances. The audience sat in stunned silence, unsure whether to laugh, applaud, or simply leave. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was a public execution, and it was becoming increasingly unclear who was the executioner and who was the victim. Kimmel's face was flushed, his carefully crafted television persona completely abandoned. At least I'm honest about what I am, Sean. I'm a comedian, a talk show host. I don't pretend to be some kind of modern-day saint saving the world one self-righteous speech at a time. And I don't pretend that making jokes about people's suffering is somehow noble. Penn shot back. You want to know the difference between us, Jimmy? When I see injustice, I try to do something about it. When you see injustice, you turn it into a punchline. The words hit their mark. Kimmel's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, the studio fell into a silence so complete you could hear the hum of the cameras. The host's hands were trembling slightly as he gripped his note cards, his knuckles white with tension. This was the moment everything changed, the point where a routine celebrity interview transformed into something much more dangerous. But as Penn sat there, his own composure beginning to crack under the weight of Kimmel's relentless attacks, neither man realized they were about to cross a line that would change everything. The real confrontation was just beginning. Kimmel shuffled through his note cards with shaking hands, his producer's voice crackling through his earpiece with urgent instructions to dial back the hostility. But something had been unleashed in the host, something that years of carefully managed celebrity interviews and scripted controversies had kept buried. He looked up at Penn with unconcealed contempt, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper that the studio microphones still managed to capture perfectly. You know what really gets me about people like you, Sean? Kimmel's tone was poisonous now, all pretense of professional courtesy abandoned. You wrap yourself in this cloak of righteousness, this humanitarian bullshit, but at the end of the day, you're just another Hollywood narcissist who can't stand not being the center of attention. Penn's face darkened, his famous intensity now focused entirely on the man across from him. People like me? What exactly does that mean, Jimmy? People who actually leave their comfort zones? People who risk their safety to help others? Or do you just mean people who make you feel small by comparison? The audience was captivated by the raw hostility, phones discreetly recording what was clearly becoming television history. Social media was already exploding with clips and commentary, but inside that studio, the outside world had ceased to exist. This was personal now, two alpha males locked in a battle that neither seemed willing to lose. Kimmel's laugh was bitter and humorless. Risk their safety? Sean, you travel with security details and stay in five-star hotels when you're not posing with refugees for the cameras. Let's not pretend you're some kind of war correspondent roughing it in the trenches. You have no idea what you're talking about. Penn's voice was dangerously quiet now. When I was in Ukraine documenting the refugee crisis, when I was in Iraq with my crew, when I spent months in Haiti living in conditions you couldn't imagine for 5 minutes, that was real, Jimmy. That was putting something meaningful into the world instead of just taking from it. Ukraine. Kimmel pounced on the word like a predator sensing weakness. Oh, that's rich. Tell me, Sean, while you were there playing war correspondent, did you happen to mention to any of those refugees that you once called the American government a bunch of war criminals? Did you explain to those people fleeing Russian bombs that you think their biggest ally in the world is just as bad as their oppressors? The question landed like a physical blow. Penn's face went white with rage, his hands clenching into fists. The studio fell into a silence so profound that the sound of the air conditioning seemed deafening. Even Kimmel seemed to realize he'd crossed into dangerous territory, but his own adrenaline and wounded pride pushed him forward. That's what I thought, Kimmel continued, pressing his advantage. It's easy to be a revolutionary when you're sitting in your Malibu mansion, isn't it? Easy to criticize America when you're enjoying all the benefits of American success. But when push comes to shove, when real evil shows its face, you still depend on the same country you love to bash. Penn stood up abruptly, his chair rolling backward with the force of the movement. The audience gasped collectively, sensing that something unprecedented was about to happen. Security personnel at the edges of the studio tensed, unsure whether to intervene or let the confrontation play out. Sit down, Sean, Kimmel commanded, but his voice carried less authority now. For the first time since the interview began, he looked uncertain, perhaps realizing that he'd pushed one of Hollywood's most notoriously volatile personalities too far. No, Jimmy, I'm done sitting, Penn said, his voice carrying across the studio with quiet intensity. You want to talk about courage? About putting yourself on the line? I've been to places where people are dying, where children are starving, where governments are failing their people. And yes, I've criticized American foreign policy when I thought it was wrong. That's not anti-American, that's pro-human. Kimmel's desperation was showing now, his carefully constructed television persona completely shattered. Oh please, spare me the saint act. You're an actor, for Christ's sake. You pretend to be other people for a living. How do we know this whole humanitarian thing isn't just another performance? The words hung in the air like a challenge. Penn took a step closer to Kimmel's desk, his presence suddenly dominating the space in a way that made everyone in the studio acutely aware of his reputation for volatility. The host instinctively leaned back in his chair, his bravado evaporating as he faced the full force of Penn's legendary intensity. A performance. Penn's voice was deadly calm now. Jimmy, when I held dying children in Haiti, was that a performance? When I helped pull bodies from the rubble in New Orleans, was that for show? When I interviewed El Chapo to shed light on the drug war that's destroying communities, was that just acting? El Chapo. Kimmel seized on the reference with desperate cunning. Right, your little adventure playing journalist with a mass murderer. Tell me, Sean, how many families of cartel victims did you consult before you decided to give one of the world's most dangerous criminals a platform? How many mothers who lost their children to drug violence got to weigh in on your journalistic integrity? The accusation hit its mark. Penn's jaw worked silently for a moment, the pain of old controversies. Clearly still raw. But instead of retreating, he stepped even closer to Kimmel's desk, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout. At least I try to understand the problem instead of just making jokes about it. At least I put myself in danger to shed light on issues that matter. What have you ever risked, Jimmy? What have you ever sacrificed? Your biggest controversy is probably choosing between two equally safe topics for your monologue. Kimmel's face was crimson now, sweat beading on his forehead under the studio lights. His handlers were frantically signaling from off-camera, but he was beyond their control now, driven by a fury that seemed to surprise even him. You want to know what I've sacrificed? Kimmel's voice cracked with emotion. I've sacrificed pretending that celebrities like you deserve respect just because you can afford to play humanitarian. I've sacrificed the comfortable lie that Hollywood activism means anything to real people with real problems. I've sacrificed. You've sacrificed nothing. Penn cut him off, his voice like a blade. You sit in your safe little studio making safe little jokes about people who actually put themselves on the line. You're a coward, Jimmy. A comfortable, safe, profitable coward. The word coward seemed to break something fundamental in Kimmel. He shot to his feet, his chair spinning wildly behind him, his face contorted with rage and humiliation. For a moment, it looked like he might actually lunge across the desk at his guest. The audience was on the edge of collective panic, unsure whether they were about to witness a talk show or a brawl. "Get out," Kimmel said, his voice shaking with barely controlled fury. "Get out of my studio. This interview is over." But Penn wasn't finished. Not even close. The final act of this confrontation was about to begin, and what happened next would end both men's evening in ways neither could have imagined. "Get out." Penn's voice carried a dangerous calm that made everyone in the studio freeze. "Jimmy, I've been thrown out of better places by better men than you. But before I go, let me tell you something about cowardice that you might want to write down for your next monologue." The studio was electric with tension. Cameras continued rolling, capturing every moment of what was clearly becoming the most explosive late-night television confrontation in decades. Kimmel stood behind his desk, chest heaving, his carefully constructed public persona lying in ruins around him. Penn moved closer to the desk, his presence filling the space between them. "You talk about sacrifice, Jimmy. You want to know what real sacrifice looks like? It's leaving your family for months to help strangers. It's sleeping in refugee camps when you could be in five-star hotels. It's putting your career on the line. To speak truth to power when everyone tells you to shut up and stick to acting." "Spare me the—" Kimmel started, but Penn's voice cut through his words like a sword. "I'm not finished." The authority in Penn's voice was absolute now. "You sit here night after night, safe in your bubble, making jokes about people's pain, mocking anyone who dares to care about something bigger than ratings and advertising revenue. You've turned cynicism into a career, Jimmy. You've made millions by convincing people that caring is naive, that trying to make a difference is somehow laughable." Kimmel's hands were shaking visibly now, his face cycling through shades of red and white as Penn's words found their target. "You don't know anything about me," he managed to say, but his voice lacked conviction. "I know enough," Penn replied, his tone growing more intense with each word. "I know that when faced with someone who actually puts their money where their mouth is, your first instinct is to tear them down. I know that instead of using your platform to educate or inspire, you use it to mock and diminish. I know that you're exactly the kind of person who makes real change harder by convincing people that caring is somehow embarrassing." The audience was completely silent now, witnessing something unprecedented in late-night television history. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was a reckoning, a moment of truth that neither man could take back. Kimmel's composure cracked completely. "You think you're so much better than everyone else," he screamed, his voice echoing through the studio. "You think your little humanitarian stunts make you some kind of hero, but you're just another rich celebrity with a savior complex." Penn's response was swift and devastating. "And you're just another coward hiding behind jokes because you're too afraid to stand for anything real. You know what the difference is between us, Jimmy? When I fail, at least I fail trying to help people. When you fail, you just fail." The words hit Kimmel like physical blows. His face went ashen, and for a moment he seemed to shrink behind his desk. The studio fell into a silence so complete that the sound of the air conditioning seemed deafening. Even the crew members had stopped moving, transfixed by the raw emotional carnage unfolding before them. "You want to know what real courage is?" Penn continued, his voice now carrying across the studio with quiet intensity. "It's admitting when you're wrong. It's acknowledging that maybe, just maybe, some things are more important than getting laughs. It's having the strength to build something instead of just tearing everything down." Kimmel's voice, when he finally found it, was barely a whisper. "Get out of my studio." Penn straightened his jacket with deliberate calm, his movements controlled and precise. "Your studio, Jimmy? This isn't your studio. This is a public platform that you've been trusted with, and you've turned it into a playground for your own insecurities and resentments. You don't deserve this platform." The host's face contorted with rage and humiliation. "Security," he shouted, his voice cracking. "Get him out of here." But Penn was already moving toward the exit, his dignity intact despite the chaos around him. He paused at the edge of the stage, turning back to face Kimmel one final time. The cameras captured every moment as he delivered his final words with quiet authority. "Jimmy, I hope someday you find something worth caring about more than your own comfort. Because right now, you're everything that's wrong with this industry, with this culture, with this moment in history. You're smart enough to make a difference, but you're too afraid to try." Kimmel stood frozen behind his desk, his mouth opening, and closing soundlessly as Penn's words echoed through the studio. The audience sat in stunned silence, unsure whether to applaud, boo, or simply leave. The host's handlers were frantically signaling to cut to commercial, but the damage was already done. Penn walked toward the exit with measured steps, his back straight, his head held high. As he reached the edge of the stage, he turned once more to the audience, his voice carrying across the studio with final, devastating clarity. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time tonight. I hope you'll remember that in a world full of people willing to mock and tear down, the real heroes are the ones still willing to build something better. With that, Sean Penn walked off the stage, leaving behind a studio in chaos, a host in ruins, and an audience that had just witnessed the complete destruction of everything Jimmy Kimmel had spent years building. The cameras continued rolling as Kimmel stood alone behind his desk, his face a mask of humiliation and rage, unable to find words to fill the void left by Penn's departure. The show cut to commercial, but the damage was irreversible. In less than 30 minutes, Sean Penn had stripped away every layer of protection, every carefully crafted persona, every defensive mechanism that Jimmy Kimmel had built around himself. What remained was a man exposed, humiliated, and utterly defeated by someone who had simply refused to play by the rules of polite celebrity conversation. As Penn disappeared into the night, the studio slowly began to empty, leaving Kimmel alone with the wreckage of his reputation and the echoing memory of words that would haunt him long after the cameras stopped rolling. The confrontation was over, but its impact would reverberate through Hollywood and beyond, a stark reminder that sometimes, when truth meets power, truth doesn't just survive, it conquers completely.